I'm Abdullah, transformational trainer, and welcome to Elevate Your Life, a transformational podcast, an invitation to take the journey towards your deepest self. It is my intention to inspire you to connect, move, and meditate. We'll tap in, tune in, and dive in, and together learn and reflect from authentic, real, and transformative conversations. Let's get started. Bismillah.
Okay. Bismillah.
Today, my guest is an exceptional human being who is truly elevating our world as an imam and an activist. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Imam Daayiee Abdullah. Imam Daayiee is the first openly gay imam in the United States. He was born in Detroit, Michigan, and the son of Southern Baptist parents. Imam Daayiee is the author of the book titled Progressive Islam: The Rich Liberal Ideas of the Muslim Faith. He is the founder and ED of the nonprofit MECCA Institute and CEO of MECCA Institute Publishing. He is the former Imam of the Light of Reform Mosque located in Washington, D.C. He is also a linguist and holds master's degrees in Chinese and Arabic languages and linguistics, and a scholar of Quranic interpretation and Shari'ah sciences. And to continue to add to his impressive bio, he is also a former public interest lawyer specializing in comparative Islamic and Western law. He describes himself as semi-retired, though I personally beg to differ, and is currently working on his second book to be released in 2024. Welcome, Imam Daayiee.
Thank you, Farhan. I'm glad to be here.
Yes, and I know we've been trying for several months to make this happen, and we have a huge time difference between us, about 10 hours between where you are and I am, I believe, but thank you so much. I know it's very early where you are and very late where I am, but I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
So am I.
You've made your life mission to be a scholar, an imam, and to serve so many communities, including the LGBTQ, women, and youth. And today I'm excited to speak to you about all of this. I want to dive into the areas about being an openly gay imam, your educational pursuits, activism, the work you've done for the Light of Reform Mosque, and the MECCA Institute, and more. So let's begin. Imam Daayiee, I understand you were born and raised in Detroit, Michigan. What was your coming out journey like? And let's just give this a time reference point because we're talking about the 1960s. There hadn't been, gay pride. There was no pride marches. What was it like coming out at that time period, and how did your family respond?
Okay. Well, just a quick caveat here right before I start on that. Growing up in a family where both my parents were educated, and they encouraged us to have, to finish minimally our high school education, but college was our goal. And so with that being the background, I was always an inquisitive kid. I was always involved in things, doing stuff, learning about things, and whatever interest I had, they supported it. So in 1969, after the summer when the first gay pride event happened, I knew that I was gay long before that. And so I was about ready to graduate from high school. I was 15, and I would be turning 16 the next year, in the early part of the next year. So my senior year, last semester, when I was graduating that December, I said to my parents, I said, well, I need to talk to you because I'm going off to college next semester and that I'm gay. And so, of course, back in the 1960s, parents would ask, well, what did we do wrong? It's like, you didn't do anything wrong. Everything is well. And, so we had that conversation, so to speak. And then at the end of the conversation, both my parents said to me, well, there's nothing wrong with you. And you've upheld all the standards that we have for your other brothers, because I have a large number of brothers and one sister who's the youngest and a half sister who's the eldest. And they said to me that there's nothing wrong with you. You've upheld all those standards we've taught all our children. And with that, I knew that I was okay. And so I just went forward and just lived my life as a man-loving man. And they've been always supportive since then, my whole family.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, my neighborhood, that I grew up with, close neighbors and stuff like that. They were always very supportive because I was a good student, never got into a bunch of trouble. I was never a problem kind of kid. And there were a bunch of us in the neighborhood. So, we did all these things together, and we were very supported by our parents, who were very involved in our educations and making certain we didn't get into trouble,
Mm-hmm.
and also provided us with lots of activities so that we could explore and learn things. And that generation, many of us have covered a wide expanse of different fields and everything. And even one of my good friends, Elaine, she, just to show you how enforced the idea of education was, during 1969, I think it was the third quarter exam, she came in number one in the nation in the LSATs. I mean, not LSATs, but the SATs. So she had like almost 500 universities contact her to come to school. A little black girl from the inner city of Detroit who gets 500 offers to go to, to go to their
That's
university.
amazing. Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that was the growing up aspect of it. And so I just went forward and lived my life. And if I had issues or concerns, I could always turn to my parents for advice and support.
So, I mean, we're talking about a time period where there was no social media, there was no real queer content on television. What was your exposure at that time? Like, did your household have conversations? Did you know other gay people? What was it like in that environment?
Well, let's go back a few years before that. When I was in junior high school, I met my first boyfriend. Well, we were boyfriend, and his name was Otis. And he lived about 2 blocks from me, and we met that summer. And we were in the same junior high school, not in the same class. And over that year, we fell in love with each other. And so we continued to build our relationship. And then in this, October of the last year of school, 1969, he committed suicide. And so it was through that process of me understanding. At that time, it was difficult to understand, but later on, as I grew older, that I knew how society would shame and berate and harm, mentally, challenge people who were gay, people who express their love for the same sex. And I think that was what made the difference. His mother had died about a year beforehand, so I think that was also part of the process. But, I just didn't know. Back then, we didn't know a lot about suicide prevention and things of that nature. So I didn't know of any signs that may have triggered me to say, hey, let's do something. But when his mother died, my mom stepped in and told him if he ever needed anything, because he had a cousin and his sister. So my mother told him, you need anything, whatever, let me know, that kind of thing. Because back then, communities were much more cohesive. And so people stepped in when parents would die and things like that, or kids would get adopted if parents, if they were left alone.
Mm-hmm. Did your parents know that he was your boyfriend?
They had an idea.
Mm-hmm.
There was just no verbal confirmation of it. But I have to say that my parents knew about me when I was 4 years old. I didn't learn this until I was 40. I wound up coming back from a trip, and I was in New York City, and I picked up this card, and it shows 2 little black boys in the 1940s Harlem, and they're both sitting on the curb, and one little boy is on his bended knee holding the hand of the other little boy like he's proposing. And the boy sitting on the curb has his hat pulled down over his face like he's embarrassed. And I showed that to my mom. I said, Mom, isn't this a great card? She said, oh, that was you at 4 years old, always talking about you and your boyfriend, and y'all going to get married and have a family, and you were going to be the daddy and things like that. Well, I knew then, and they knew now. They knew later.
So there were no surprises when you came out.
No surprises.
Right. How did your parents influence your activism? I believe you were born around the time of the civil rights movement in the United States. What sorts of influence did that time period, as well as your parents, have on you in becoming an activist?
Well, both of my parents were very much involved in the civil rights movement. My father was involved in the unions because growing up in Detroit, everybody pretty much was in a union. So it was just a way of life. And so growing up, you were around, you did activities, you went to union events of various types. Like some of my uncles worked for the auto industry. And there were other people that we knew who did, who were unionized. And so our lifestyles were of a higher quality and those things. So that activism then fed into the civil rights movement because a lot of money came out of Detroit and Chicago because those Black people there had the income to donate to various causes. And so that's why Black publications and other things, Ebony, Sepia, and Jet Magazine, all those became from Black people who had money to support those magazines. And various other publications, like the Michigan Chronicle is one of the publications that was, a major newspaper for decades. So I think that's how that part. And so I've seen them do that. I joined in. So when the civil rights movement started, even as a kid, I participated in those children marches, things like that.
Oh. And did what happened with your first boyfriend, Otis, influence your activism for the LGBT community?
Yes, it did. When we were, teenagers sitting out in the summertime under the tree, enjoying each other's company, Otis Redding's song "Sitting by the Dock of the Bay" came out, and we had always dreamed about going to San Francisco, and so that was one of the things. So later in my life, actually, when I turned 20, right before I turned 21, I went out there to San Francisco. A friend of mine, I told you earlier, Elaine, she got in a position with the state of California as a psychologist and invited me to come out to visit. So I did for the Christmas holiday and fell in love with San Francisco. And by a month later, right around my 21st birthday, I relocated there. And I lived there for several years. And so I had a chance to sit on the dock of the bay.
Great. I'm sure Otis was with you at that moment as well.
Yeah.
I read that at the age of 8, you told your parents that you felt like your religion wasn't right for you. What was it that you felt that at the age of 8? And I'm trying to imagine this conversation between two parents and an 8-year-old child, and the child is saying, I don't feel like my religion is right for me. And it feels like a very adult-like conversation. But how did that conversation unfold? Would you mind talking a bit about that?
Well, it was a conversation that I had about a year beforehand. I had gotten baptized in their faith tradition. And I found that when I would go to Sunday school for lessons and stuff, I was a very precocious kid, and I would come in with my concordance and the Bible and my notes and everything, and I would get in Sunday school class challenging the teacher, and the teacher would be like, "Well, I don't know. You need to ask, Reverend Johnson about this." And it was actually Dr. Johnson, who was head of doctorates in economics and did great things for that church. And so it was a conversation I had with him. One day he was talking, and in his sermon, he said he believed in birth control. Now, Dr. Johnson had 12 kids, and 2 of his sons and I were about the same age. We were in the Boy Scouts together there at the church. And so I said to him, I said, well, we were the Cub Scouts at that time. And I said to him, I said, I really enjoyed your sermon because I agree with you. I think people should plan their families and stuff. I said, but Dr. Johnson, it seems to me that in order for you to learn that lesson, it's like you had to learn gravity by jumping off the cliff. And so his sister was born. So I knew I was 8. His sister had just been born.
Right.
And my father was holding my sister in his arm, and my mother grabbed my hand and says, "Let's go." And from that day forward, Dr. Johnson would always look at me a little strangely. So having a conversation with my parents that this just wasn't working for me was part of it. And so my parents said, well, you always need something to hold on to. That's what faith is about. And so they allowed me to move forward and explore. So I wound up exploring various Christian denominations, you know, from evangelical to the Catholic Church. And even I had some Jewish friends from school. So I went to the synagogue. I went various places to learn more about it. And when I was in high school, I got introduced to metaphysics, you know, Christian Science and then science of mind. And that's what got me at that point, is that I started following that. And then later on, continued, I've studied Buddhism. And then eventually, when I was in China, studying Chinese at Beijing University, I got introduced to Islam there through a Hui Chinese brother.
Right. So, I mean, you grew up as a Southern Baptist, and then you end up in China, and that's kind of like where you're introduced to Islam. But from what I understand, that involved, you know, you praying and asking for guidance about what it is that, you know, you wanted to do with your life. And I read that you had visions. Can you talk about those visions and sort of give us an idea of what happened, what that experience was like? And yeah, I'm just curious about that part.
Okay. Well, I've been working as a court stenographer for the IRS. You know, court stenographer, the person who sits in on the trials and takes the verbatim dictation of the trial itself. And
Mhm.
so I was successful in my career, making money, traveling all over the country, something that people would say, "Oh, you have a great career." But I felt hollow inside. I just didn't feel satisfied. And so I was praying. I was actually based in Chicago at the time, and I was praying, and I said, "God, give me something for me to do that will fill the rest of my life, something that I would have a purpose." And so I started to feel fidgety, and I decided I was going to quit my job and move back to Washington, D.C. Contacted some friends there. I told them, says, "I need to come back." They said, "Sure." They had an extra room, and I went back. It was unfurnished, so I had to sleep in my sleeping bag when I got there. But I started meditating and I had the vision. The first one was to, you know, I was in San Francisco again. And then the second dream repeated itself a couple of days later. And then the voice said to me, I was standing on the mountainside. I used to go up to the observatory, Mount, what is it? Montopolis, I think it is, in Marin County. And I saw myself standing there looking out over the bay. And the inner voice said to me, "Step off the cliff." And I did. And I've been floating ever since.
So this is
So
in your vision or in your
in
dream?
my vision.
Okay.
And then the voice said to study Chinese. And I woke up and I said, "Study Chinese." Okay, well, when you ask God for something, you follow up. And
Right.
so I went to 3 different schools there: University of Maryland, which had a part-time program; George Washington University had a full-time program; in Georgetown. I went to GW, and they looked at me at that time. You know, the folks really had low expectations of being Black. So they looked at me like, "Nigga, why do you want to study Chinese?" And it's like, they gonna
Sorry,
go
excuse
here.
me. Right.
Well, I mean, that's basically what it was like. And then I went over to Georgetown and I spoke to Dr. Lee, God rest his soul. And Dr. Lee, I talked to him and told him I wanted to study Chinese. And we talked for about an hour. And he gave me a note, says, "Take this over to the Center of Minority Affairs." I said, "Okay." And what he had done is he recommended me for what they call a community scholar fellowship, where people have been in a career but wanted to change and do something different. And I wound up receiving a fellowship, you know, and that following fall, I started at Georgetown University studying Chinese.
Hmm.
And 9 months later, I was in Beijing at Beijing University. So you ask for it, you get it.
I suppose. And I guess, have you had that sort of connection from a very young age where there was insight or visions? Like, was that your that couldn't have been your first vision?
No, it wasn't, but
Yeah.
that had been part of the process,
Right.
so that I had those at different time periods in my life. And so I would have an inspiration to do something, I would go for it, and generally it happened.
Wow,
So
that's amazing.
and that's why I knew I had to follow it.
And when you get a vision, how do you know with certainty that it's a vision and not just your imagination?
Because the steps that when I go to follow it, the doors keep opening.
Okay,
So
I
when I got
understand.
the letter from Georgetown saying I had received the fellowship and everything, I would talk to a good lesbian friend of mine, Key, and I said, Key, I got this thing. What do I? And she looked at me dead in the face and she says, "Okay, I got one question for you." I said, "What is that?" She says, because I told her, I said, it's going to be like 5 years of study. She says, "Well, what are you going to be doing 5 years from now anyway?"
Hmm.
And that was like, you got to move forward.
I love
Can't.
that.
And
And
I actually talked to her not long ago, about a month ago, and I reminded her of that conversation. I said, 40 some years ago, we became friends. And then here it is, almost 40 years ago now. And I wound up being, well, actually, it is 40 years this year.
mhm,
I started this journey. And she said, I don't remember that conversation. I said, well, don't worry, I'll remember it for both of us.
that's great. And for you, was there any conflict in being gay and following the faith of Islam? And if so, how did you reconcile with that?
Well, I didn't have any problems with it because I knew I was gay, so there was no issue about that. But finding out about Islam, I had to search through what I understood, because I was getting so much information from so many different people of various sects within this Muslim faith, that some would say it was okay, some saying it wasn't, blah, blah, blah. So I had to do the research on my own. So after I finished my degree in Chinese, I started Arabic studies, and that allowed me access to the language and opportunity to go and live in the Middle East. I was in Cairo for a year, Amman, Jordan for a year, and then Damascus. And so having three different cultures, although very similar, they were different. And my interactions with people and having them, my gay radar and things, I saw things were going on there. So they're saying one thing and doing another. And there's Rachel Maddox, who's on MSNBC. She says, watch what they do, not what they say.
Right.
So that was proven to me that men did have sexual relationships with men there. Now, I didn't get involved with those situations because I was there for study and understood that if I was there and got exposed, it could mean a lot of different things. But I saw it. And then after I graduated from university and wound up going to Saudi Arabia, that's when I saw it in real, actual day-to-day activity, how men were interacting with each other. And those things, men from, various Muslim ethnicities and backgrounds, nationalities. And so I saw how it interacted there. And that's when I knew that what they were saying was what I referred to as establishment Islam was very different from how people live their lives as Muslims.
Mm. When I first started this particular season of my podcast and called it Queer Relief and started with my own personal journey of my coming out story, as well as talking to other people of color, I did receive some backlash and I expected some. That's fine. It wasn't a lot, but people were saying things like, shame on you, homosexuality is a sin, and it says that in the Quran. So my question to you is, as a scholar and an imam, and all the research that you've done, what from what you've learned, does Islam say in regards to homosexuality?
Well, actually, it says nothing.
Mm-hmm.
What it talks about, and when people frequently relate to the Lot story, is that heterosexual men should not be going around raping people and oppressing people using sex as a form of torture. That's what it basically says. And when you look at the Lut story, wherever it's referenced in the Quran, it's also referenced with other stories that talk about people who were oppressive to innocent people, and that the Quran speaks against oppression, injustice. And to rape someone who's not your consenting partner is oppression, period. End of story. So when people try to use that, I explain to them that the real issue that you're trying to do is that you don't know your Muslim history. I said when the Muslims during the time of the Abbasid period, they translated much of the older Greek and Roman period and their philosophies and sciences and things of this nature. I said, and that's where they picked up the Aristotelian concept of nature of law, or the law of nature, that everything is binary. And so that was absorbed into the Islamic psyche, as well as when they interacted with the Persians, which also had a similar philosophy. And therefore, through their administration, they utilized that as a form of control of the masses, that homosexuality was forbidden. So in actuality, they were using something that was different than what was going on in itself and what the Quran was saying.
So the teachings that people are saying or referring to is just their own interpretation, or or a form of control, like as you say.
Well, it's more social, cultural, and social religious and framework. If your culture says that homosexuality is wrong, then you're going to grow up with that concept. But if it's new or supportive of it, then you're going to grow up differently. So that's what it comes from. So young children are so impressive, and they're indoctrinated through the process of either fear or intimidation. They pick up on it and they learn, oh, well, I shouldn't talk about this, though I may feel this way. I shouldn't talk about it because if I do, they're going to get me.
Mm-hmm. I guess so. For somebody to reference and to the Quran and say to me in a comment that it says that in the Quran, and what you're saying is actually incorrect. It doesn't say that at all.
Correct. Now, see, there are many different ways. This is the problem with people. They pick and choose, just like in the Bible or in the Torah. They pick and choose what verses that they want to use to support their thoughts. But the problem is that it's a whole. You have to look at the Quran as its whole message. And the message talks about human relationships. Doesn't matter what gender and how it's associated, but it's human relationships. You're supposed to have a commitment between two people and their relationship, be it marriage, be it muta, be it concubinage. All these different things are human relationships, and there's certain standards in them as well. You're supposed to treat them as your mate, your partner, your spouse. So depending on which one it is, each word would be appropriate to it. But you're supposed to have standards in those relationships. So I was talking to someone, writing them a note, and I told them, I said, the real issue here, they were talking about, they wanted to be involved in this kind of relationship. I said, well, that's fine with me. I don't have any problem with that. They were saying the polyamorous relationship. I said, I don't have a major problem with that. I said, but it's your standards. And he said, well, what do you mean? And I told him, I said, it's a poor, adage, but a thief is a thief is a thief. If you're in a polyamorous relationship and you cheat, whether you're in a single one-on-one or in a couple or in polyamorous, you're a cheater, period. And that's the standard I'm talking about. Your standard is that you will cheat on anybody. So don't be a cheater. If you're going to be in a relationship, no matter what it is, stick to your commitments. And this is where the problem stems from, is that people don't want to adhere to having standards. Mm-hmm. For example, when I do counseling with people, I explain, I says, if you find somebody you like, give it 30 days before you have sex with them, at least 30 days. That way you get over them, the infatuation with them, because they may be good looking. I like the shape of a man's behind. Yes, I do. But the reality is, I have to get over that and get to see who they are. What kind of mind do they have? What kind of standards do they have?
Who's the person attached to that behind?
That's right. Before I became Muslim, I had dated, and he was a nice guy and everything, but we were going out to dinner, and he said, well, I need to go home and change. I said, fine. I went with him to his house, and I was waiting for him to change. And I said, well, let me get some water. He said, sure, go in the kitchen. And when I looked in the sink, there were dirty dishes there. Now, who hasn't had dirty dishes before, But they come on the water. So those dishes had been there for days. So I knew I don't think I would question his hygiene.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's those kinds of, you have, as the Quran says, you look for the signs and symbols,
Mm-hmm.
you
Right.
know. Why didn't
Yeah.
we didn't the relationship because it was some of the standards that he had that just didn't match with mine.
Right. In 2015, you said in an interview with the CBC, or the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, that the Quran supports sexual diversity. Can you please talk a little bit about this?
Okay. The sexual diversity comes from the diversity of human beings. There's several references in the Quran, but the one I use most is El Rom, which is 30:22 through 24. And it explains that we are born with different colors and tongues for us to learn from each other. And so when I looked at those two verses, it said to me, okay, colors and tongues, all right, different races and different languages. All right, that's fine. And to learn from each other, okay, that means that we interact with each other on the exterior framework, to learn about each other from our ethnicities and historical frameworks, things like that. But then afterwards, I said, well, what about the ghaib, the unseen, the unknown? And it took me a while for that to sit in the back of my head and do its calculation. And then one day I was riding the bus and it hit me. It means colors is our temperaments. Our tongues means our tastes and styles. And then it hit me. I said, oh my goodness, that means that Allah can create 8 billion people and we're all not alike. And so the Quran speaks to that our diversity is so great. Why wouldn't we have diversity in our sexual orientations as well? It just seemed illogical not to have that.
Mm-hmm.
So you can be I, for example, can be a Black man in his 60s who studied Chinese, lived in China, lived in the Middle East, and then find somebody else, which I have met other people in China who were Arab and Muslim, who speaks the language, and then I meet a Chinese person who has a similar background, and we all have these things that interconnect us. And we didn't know each other from Adam, so to speak. So that diversity and how we interacted with each other, who said that we would all know that we would meet people like each other in that same way? And the same, with gender and various other things, being transgender, all of that. So those diversities are so expansive. For people to say it's only two genders, it's only this, it's only that, it shows how narrow that their thinking is, not how narrow the world can be.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for clarifying that for me.
I'll say one thing is that when Muslims say Allahu Akbar,
mm-hmm.
if they mean it, they wouldn't be so narrow-minded.
Thank you for that. Before I ask this next set of questions, I just want to preface by saying that I am personally a Shia Ismaili Muslim, also known as the Ismailis, and our Imam is the Aga Khan, who's the spiritual leader of 15 million Ismailis worldwide. And he is the direct descendant of Hazrat Ali, who is the cousin and son-in-law of Prophet Muhammad, may peace be upon him. And for us, the Imam is appointed and is the result of a direct lineage. However, for different sects, such as yours, this is an area that I'm unfamiliar with. So could you please possibly explain how you became an Imam? Like, is that an appointment, or is that something that you chose? And like, what is the process?
Well, it sort of came by way of a different path of getting there. Because of the HIV situation in the United States at the time, I got a phone call one day where a person said that a Muslim brother, and I don't know their background, I didn't even ask the question, had transitioned and from HIV, and the body had been sitting in the morgue for quite a while. The parents or the family didn't claim it, and so they wanted to see if I would be willing to go and do the janazah prayer for them. And I told him, yes, I had started studying at the Graduate School of Islamic Social Sciences, which was a program that was training imams for the U.S. government and the hospitals, prisoners, the military, things like that. So I was studying there under Dr. Taha Jabbar Alawani. May Allah continue to bless him in the highest. And it was through training with him that I said, oh, sure, I would go and do that. Because I always believe that every human being has the right, R-I-G-H-T, to have their religious rights, R-I-T-E-S, performed for them no matter who they are. And so I went down to the morgue, and the body had already set in with rigor mortis and everything. So I did the best I could in terms of doing a basic washing of the body. And I had never done a shroud before, so I did the best I could to do it. And I knew that they were going to cremate the body. I didn't have money to have him buried, but at least I performed the rites for them. And it was through that process that the word got out that, Imam Daayiee did this for, blah, blah, blah. So I didn't go in for the role per se to be that. I had gone in for the training because I knew that in the Muslim queer community, we needed spiritual guidance. And since they weren't going to get it from the establishment Islam side of the framework, they needed someone who could help them understand their faith, understand their lives in a contextual way. And so with my continued studies, I wound up in that position. Like I said, God leads you along the path and you follow.
Mm-hmm. And you also perform marriages for same-sex couples and interfaith couples as well. Is that correct?
That's correct. I do that and have done so. The first one was in 2002, and my last one was in, 2018. 2018 was the last wedding I did. I've sort of given up on doing that. There's so many others out there. And sadly, I've had people say to me, well, your fee is too high. And I explained to them that, okay, well, if you can't afford me, that's fine. But to me, that's disingenuous. It's not that my fee is too high. It's that you can't afford it. Now, this is the thing. I look at it this way, two ways. You don't go into a Maserati car dealership and say to them, I got BMW money, I want a car. It just doesn't work. So you got the Imam Daayiee who's going to perform your nikah for you. Well, that's like asking Aretha Franklin or what's her name? Madonna to come and perform at your wedding, and you don't pay them. Mm. Even if I was to come and say, okay, I'll do it for you for free, what about all the expenses that are associated with that? Aretha Franklin said that, yes, I'll come and do a fundraiser for you, but you got to pay my, transportation, you got to pay the band, you got to pay all these different expenses. It's not just for free. Mm-hmm. And that's the problems I have within our communities, that we expect people to do things for free. Oh, well, Allah will bless you. No, Allah is not paying my rent. I got to pay my rent. I got to pay my medical bills, and insurance.
Right. There's a practicality to it for sure.
That's right. And disingenuous. And that's where you get my call. Mm-hmm. And so I just think people sometimes ask for too much without thinking about the realities. They'll spend $30,000 on that wedding, but then don't want to pay the imam. Mm-hmm. Where does that make sense?
No, it doesn't seem right. But speaking of same-sex marriages, to your knowledge or awareness or in your research, in Islamic history, has there ever been any examples of same-sex marriages?
To my knowledge, I have not seen that in written form, but you do have a number of instances where you've had emirs, like Al-Amin, who was the son after Rashid, the Caliph Rashid, who in 802, 803, I think is when he died, and his full Arab birth son became the emir in Baghdad. And for 3 years he ruled, and he was a gay imam, a gay caliph. And then through subterfuge back then, his younger brother, who was half Persian, murdered him. But he lived in the palace with his lover, who was part of the military. So you have instances like that pop out every now and then in the history. Now, no one gets involved in talking about that. But if you do your research and do your history, read history, those things just pop out. They'll just say it.
Mm-hmm. So there is definitely history of same-sex relationships, but we just don't know if there were marriages.
Well, marriage is something where two people commit to each other. So I'm pretty certain that their thing would be considered a marriage today.
Right.
But you can't have a nikah when it's not legally sanctioned.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's why I say to people today, I say, just because it's against the law or it's not legal doesn't mean it can't be.
Mm-hmm.
And laws oftentimes can be unjust.
Right. You were the former Imam and founder of the Light of Reform Mosque in Washington, D.C. Can you talk about your leadership in its creation and your role as the Imam for this mosque?
Well, we had an event in Washington, D.C., and this was around the time they were discussing same-sex marriage laws in Washington, D.C. And we had a big event. Pamela Taylor, who's a female imam, had come to lead a holiday prayer. And so we were at this big center, which was well known for civil rights movement and everything. So we went there and held it at that center. And I realized then that we needed to have an inclusive mosque in Washington, D.C., because I saw all the different people who showed up. We had senior citizens there. We had, young people with young families, and all, teenagers through, senior citizens. And I said, well, we need to have a community where they can feel comfortable being there. And that's when I started that. And that was how it developed into that. And it went on for 4 years, almost 5 years. But I found that, and we have this problem in our community, and I can talk about this a little more in depth later, but in our community, we don't necessarily support those who do things to help make certain that we have it available for everyone else. People will come in the queer community, they'll come and want to get fixed, deal with their trauma and stuff, but then they don't donate their time, money, or energy into making certain that those institutions continue so that those who come after them will have the same opportunity. And so after that time, I was worn out. I was tired, and I couldn't get people to support me. I say I needed 10 people to help me. They could come once every 2 months for a Friday, help set up, help take, close out the thing. And then, we would have different people who could fluctuate through that process. And I only got a couple who said they would do that. And I refused to put them in that situation to do that every week.
Can I ask, what has been the response from the Muslim community and the LGBTQ community, the LGBTQ community to you as a gay Muslim and an imam?
Well, there's been two different sides to this response when you use the term response. Now, from the general larger establishment Islam community, I've had both imams and scholars and just lay people who are very supportive. They understand and feel very supportive of the diversity of the LGBT community, either through personal experience, meaning that they had a relative who identified as queer, LGBT queer, or in some way like that, or they psychologically, through education and exposure to the world, understood that there's diversity in who Muslims are. So I've had that, but then the vast majority of them have been anti-LGBT, anti-queer in their thinking because they've been trained to think that way. So you get both sides of that. And I've had, and this is, and as an aside to that, when I've done counseling for parents of LGBT queer children, I found about 45% of the fathers were supportive of their children, and about 55% of the mothers were supportive. So a lot of times parents are supportive, but some of the issues they have tend to be about exposure. You know, I had one young guy who was about ready to go to college, and his father said, "Well, it's not that I know my son is gay, and I'm not against that, but I own a business in the community, and people find out, they'll destroy the community, destroy my business. They won't support it, and then that influences his younger brothers and sisters." And so, as I told him, I said, "Well, if you're going off to college, you're not going to do college at home. You're going off to college. Then wait, come out then. That way, you're not influencing your parents in such a negative way. It can't be about me, 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 me all the time. Mm-hmm. It has to be about you and your surroundings, you and your situation. And sometimes we have to be the better person, and not be so selfish to identify and think about all who are concerned. That's how we build family. That's how we build support, by taking their lives into consideration as well."
Mm-hmm. You are the founder and president of the MECCA Institute, an online inclusive and progressive Islamic theological school. What is the purpose of the institution, and who does it serve?
Well, the MECCA Institute is its goal is to develop an inclusive community. And we started off by developing a chaplaincy program, which we wanted to train individuals interested in becoming imams or imamas, male and female imams, and so that our community would have people in their locales. Back when we started, there were, I think, 5 or 6 cities, major cities, that had people either an inclusive mosque or had a women's mosque. And those numbers have not continued to grow, partially because the Muslim community is not supporting them in a way so that they can grow. And MECCA Institute suffered the same way. We first opened, we got scholarships and philanthropic funding for it. But when that dried up, organizations and things like that did not support the program. And then as we were starting to, seek additional funding, then the pandemic happened. So everything sort of went silent. But now MECCA Institute, in our search to make certain that we have continued funding, we established our publishing house. So MECCA Institute Publishing now provides books in 5 different formats so that people can buy our books that we're developing in our lecture series and things like that. And so that way we'll be able to raise the funding so that we can then start the school again and do other things, our research center and things like that, and promote our community, because we now have a community portal that people can come to and see that, you join and then you can participate in learning the variety of different things from various scholars and also general information. So it's a way in which to get people to help them educate themselves, and to expand and add to the knowledge base that's there. When I was much young, a couple of decades ago, I knew that I couldn't be at everybody's conversation with their parents. So I imposed upon them, I said, you got to learn this stuff for yourself, so that when you go into these conversations, at least you have some armament to deal with it. Doesn't mean you're going to win the war, but at least you got some stuff to fight the battle. And that's how the school and the idea of development, really expanded and grew. And that's how MECCA Institute came about.
And so from what I read, there's 3 sort of communities, and that includes the LGBTQ, women, and youth.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you touch a little bit about that?
Okay. Well, the movement in terms of women's identification, we know that due to the patriarchal underpinnings on, the men are greater than women, the concept of God, man, then woman, is the way that people see it, versus God, and then it's men, women, LGBT, children, but on the same level. And so it's to help re-educate and help them develop their own understanding, so that they can talk to women, talking to women, supporting women, so that they develop things. We have a lady, one of our first female authors, who's a physician and also an anthropologist. So her first book with us is Islam and Anthropology, but she's now working on a series of medical women's health from a medical perspective. So that way we're helping people understand that. We have a fellow who's a Sufi master, and I'm doing things on LGBT. We have another gentleman who's a Quran specialist, and another fellow who's an Islamic historian. So they're writing books and building materials so that people can learn about things, so that they have a progressive view of how life can be, how we can see the world the same way. Because we have the 5 different schools of thought. Well, they are alternatives to each other. Why can't we have an alternative that's progressive as well?
That's great.
Now, let me just say one other thing to that.
Absolutely.
In my TED, I think those who've seen my TED talk, I make the conversation that says, 100, 150 years from now, and maybe even sooner, we're going to have Muslims living on other planets as humankind goes off into, in the search of science and exploration. And Muslims are going to be part of that. So my question to them is that, which way is Kaaba when it comes time for prayer? And so I don't know the real answer. Mm-hmm. Those Muslims figured it out, but I think it's, mathematically you arc the prayer off of the star that's nearest you. Is it Andromeda? I don't know.
I don't know. And I don't know if I'll be around when that happens, but I suppose, you with this program will give people an opportunity to continue to practice the faith with, an evolving world. And our world is evolving. Our ideas are evolving, our technology is evolving, and our faith and our practice has to be somewhat applicable to those changing times.
Agreed. Now, one thing I when I talk to people, I don't get into heavy, you should do this, you should do that kind of thing. But I asked them to contemplate the things. I said, okay, Prophet Muhammad was born 1,500 years ago in a society that was pretty much Bedouin influenced, but it was a mercantile society. I said, okay, so you cannot say that the stories, and I refer to Hadith as being stories about Prophet Muhammad and various other people of that time period. They didn't live in space. So how are we going to adopt Hadith in space? There won't be a camel caravan, okay? Mm-hmm. So what things do we absorb from them? And the only thing we can take from them are certain standards. This is why I keep emphasizing the idea of standards. How do we treat each other as human beings? Because our worlds will be very different, uniquely different. Mm-hmm. Therefore, how do we carry Islam forward? Through our ways and how we interact with each other as human beings towards other human beings.
That's great. Imam Daayiee, you have created an incredible legacy. Have you thought about your legacy thus far, and how do you want to see it continue to grow and continue to make an impact in our world?
Well, I've thought about this and have talked to several people about it. And I want MECCA Institute to continue to be part of that legacy. But I want to have, I've been thinking about that when I get funding coming in, we get this publishing house really moving, and people need to buy our books. People need to buy our things from us so that we can then do stuff. They get something, we get money, then we can turn that money around to build other things for our community. And I want to do a Daayiee Foundation where it can help people who want to explore things that are not necessarily the norms. If you want to study foreign languages, do so. Here's a scholarship to go live somewhere and learn those cultures and what skills others that you have developed, how can you apply them to those areas? That to me is how you change the world, getting people involved and following their dreams and aspirations. And if people are doing that, that's how we really make a difference. It's not politics is one thing, and that's the problem that we have, too much political referencing, but the real reality is that it's individual lives. It's me taking time to talk to that kid that, who's having problems, to talk to that person, to spend time with the person who's sick, who's dying, and to talk to them and get them to understand that this life is part of transition. You came in here and you're not going to get out alive. So what are you going to take with you when you go? What are those things? Are you going to have good memories? Are you going to have standards that you have, beliefs and things that support you as a human being, as a spiritual being? So those are the ways in which you get people to understand that we care about each other. We can't make everything perfect.
Mm-hmm.
This world is not based on those standards. No one lives a perfect life. But also, when you come in here, you don't get out alive. So what are you going to take with you? And that's what's so important. I encourage people to always think about that. Allah didn't put us here to, show off, so to speak. And when I say show off, meaning look at what I got, look what I've been, look at this. But versus, who did I care for? How did I help someone who's in need? How did they help me? I still learn from little children when I interact with kids. I learn things from them. Sometimes truths I don't want to deal with. Oh, you're big and fat. Yes, that's true. I am big and fat. But I said, but when you become big and fat, what are you going to do? How are you going to accept that? Mm-hmm. So it's those kinds of things where you get children to understand that though they see the world a certain way, how are they interacting in that world? Mm-hmm. Are they bully? Are they sympathetic? I love my grandma. Well, then make certain that you love all grandmas.
I love that. I mean, legacy is something that I think about quite often, and I appreciate that. Thank you. My next question is, what advice would you have to offer anyone who may be listening to this, who is queer, either Muslim or not, and is conflicted about their sexuality?
Well, I could easily say, well, get over it, blah, blah, blah. But it's not so easy. When we face challenges like that, both internally and from our own perspective, us looking out, and then also seeing what's looking in, it can be very challenging. But the reality, as I said earlier, you came into this life and you're not going to get out alive. And if you don't stand up for something, you will always fall for something. And you have to stand up for yourself. That doesn't mean that you go out there and, get an AK-47 and go around killing people because you don't like what they do, either with the physical gun or with your mouth and tongue. Mm-hmm. You work on developing connections, developing coalitions. That's what's so important. And I think that's where the problem stems from. And I'm not victimizing, I'm not victim blaming in any way, but sometimes we are our own worst enemy. So we have to learn to see, okay, I have a particular issue. How do I resolve some of these issues? Sometimes it takes you going and getting counseling. It takes you going and talking to other people. It takes you interacting with other folks who are like yourself to learn some of your commonalities. And then you have a foundation to build upon. But when you go around blaming other people for all your problems, well, it's not their problem. You have to learn to work with those things on yourselves. I'm sorry that you may have grown up in a traumatic situation. I'm sorry that people may have abused you. Various kinds of people have had that similar experience, and they're not LGBTQ Muslims. So we have to look at our circumstance and find ways into how to resolve some of those issues. You're not going to find all the answers because some of the answers are internal to you. But you can find support outside because there are various people out there who are willing to seize the problem, may have experienced it, and may have some answers for you. But you got to talk to them. You got to find them. Mm-hmm. AI is not the answer, okay?
Yes, AI is not the solution for sure, but certainly, it is a journey. And I like the fact that there are people like you who can act as a resource for those people who are struggling or conflicted. That said, what do you feel needs to change in the intersection of the LGBTQ plus community and Islam? And how do you continue to see yourself as a leader towards these changes?
Well, two thoughts on that. One, since MECCA Institute has started, basically once we opened up the school, our organization became the largest progressive Muslim organization in the world. In terms of, on Facebook, we have about 106,000 people who follow us on Facebook. And we have various other networks that are out there. We do various things. So we know that we've moved into a leadership position. And that's just through organically happening. But with that leadership comes a great responsibility. And so with that leadership, our responsibility is to help our community, the LGBT queer community, to understand that we have to work together and not against each other. And that's where I've seen over the last couple of decades since the movement has started, is that there's been too much of, I'm not going to help them because I don't like the way they do so-and-so, and I'm not going to help them because I don't like that's self-defeating. That hurts each other. And that's why we don't have institutions today, because of that infighting. And remember I talked earlier about selfishness? If we work together, we would have that. And that's why I was saying earlier in terms of MECCA Institute, if different organizations had just sent one student since 2017 each year, we would have probably 15 or more Muslim imams, inclusively trained imams around the North America and Canada today. But you see how nobody's supporting? We have nothing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we do it to ourselves. So we have to recognize that. Stop doing harm to ourselves and work together. Just because so-and-so got $5 more than you, did they use that $5 for the betterment of the organization, or did they do it for themselves? If they did it for themselves only, then replace them. Get somebody who does it better. But don't stop doing it because so-and-so did something that wasn't kosher, wasn't, positive for the overall framework. Stop the infighting, support each other. And I know that's hard for human beings to do that, but we got to fight our worst enemy, which is our inner selves. That's the whisperer. When they talk in the Quran about the, Shaitan whispering, it's those whispers that destroy us. And we have to confront them.
Mm-hmm. Well, Imam Daayiee, we could talk for hours. I am enjoying this conversation, but we are nearing the end. And I want to first of all say what an honor it has been having you on my podcast. I sincerely love all the work that you do. You are truly an inspiration and making a huge impact on the lives of Muslims and non-Muslims, including the LGBTQ community, youth and women worldwide, through your activism, your former work with the Light of Reform Mosque, the MECCA Institute, your teachings and publications, and taking the time to speak with me today. I want to say that I will have all your contact information, including the websites or the MECCA Institute and any social media links in the notes section, as well as your email address if anyone would like to contact Imam Daayiee directly. I'll have his address there for you to connect with him. Thank you so much. I hope to have you back on the podcast because I know there is so much more that I would love to talk to you about. But inshallah, we will speak again soon.
Well, thank you, Farhan. I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure to talk with you, an honor to meet with you, because I've heard about you too. So there's a mutual respect there. And I really appreciate the process that you're and the work that you're doing to help inform people that there are a bunch of folks out here that are resources and that they can utilize. So I thank you very much for that. Shukran.
Shukran.
So you take care, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm Farhan Abdullah. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's episode of Elevate Your Life, a transformational podcast. I hope today's conversation has elevated you in some way and inspired you to connect, move, and meditate. I'd really appreciate your support by following and rating this podcast. Come back soon and join me for another transformative conversation.